Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Gridiron Review. Alongside Bill Wagner, I'm Pete Medhurst. Great to have you with us. As always, we start off at the youth level. And Bill, good varsity U level game this week. Our man Chris Sexton providing the highlights for us. Bucks and Gork. Bucks get a big 12-6 win. This division, by the way, it's gotten a lot more competitive this year. And as we all know, Bill, this is the level most important because these are the guys that feed more than likely into the high schools next year, and good to see a little bit more parity within this division this year. That means we've got a lot more good players out there.
Right, well, I was just going to say, would Bucks feed Northeast or Chesapeake or both?
Probably both.
Right.
Yeah, probably both.
Both of those programs are really doing well so far this season. We'll talk about it during our high school segment, but Northeast football is having the best season it's had in a long time, at least in terms of early going. But yeah, no, these are the teams that you're going to see these kids that are playing varsity U. Next year, they're going to be in high school either playing JV, and if they're really good, they might play varsity right away. But I was going to ask you with regard to the rain, because we had the storm, and some schools like Annapolis Area Christian School pushed their game up to Thursday just to make sure they could get it in.
Yeah.
Anything going on with the youth level, and how does Anne Arundel County Recreation and Parks manage that? Because you got to be prudent. You don't want to put kids out on sloppy fields. And
I mean, look, I think it goes this way. You play it by ear. Unless you have a slam dunk bad weather guarantee situation, then you kind of hope things play out. And the teams that play on natural grass, if it gets to it, where it can't be playable, people have to make an intelligent decision. We put, some of that decision. Now, my daughter played a game in the rain on a turf field, which, because of those turf fields, we now have the ability, as long as there's no lightning and thunder, to play those games. Years ago, we would have lost all those games over the last couple of weeks. The high schools would have lost a ton of soccer and field hockey games without the turf field facilities that Anne Arundel County Parks and Recreation is responsible for putting into those football stadiums in and around the county. So I think that's part of the big deal. We got a couple teams, Crofton playing their games at South River, General's Highways playing theirs at Annapolis. That helps, so we know, unless, again, we're going to get thunder and lightning, that those games are going to be played. Most of the grass facilities around, look, these people are hardcore, man. Unless it's a deluge, unless it's a monsoon, they want to go play the game.
Right. They do not want to lose the game, because that's when we really get in trouble, is rescheduling.
And we've already had to do some of that. Jeff Porter's had to do a lot of scrambling to get these games made up, the ones that we have lost due to the weather, as midweek makeups. But the problem with that is you're putting the kids, in a lot of situations where they're playing 2 full games.
Right, that's tough.
Now, the littler kids, it's not as bad because you don't have
as much
the
physical
severity
contact,
of the contact that you do at the older level. But again, you're putting, in some cases, 7th, 8th graders who move a little faster, a little harder. You're putting them in a situation where they are having that contact, twice in a 3 or 4 day period. And you ideally don't want to do that. But unfortunately, that's the situation you run into at times. Real quick.
What you're saying is that Jeff Porter often will let the commissioner at the individual organization that is hosting games make the final call whether it's safe to play?
As long as there is no significant situation that we know of ahead of time where Jeff and John Spinnenweber in our office make that decision ahead of time, they often put it in the hands of the commissioners. And a lot of these commissioners are veterans. They've been out here before. They know what's safe and what's not.
Right. Like when my kids played at Gambrels-Odenton Recreation Council, that was a grass field. I know they do use Arundel now a little bit, but it may not always be available. I'm still sure they're playing a lot of games at Gork Park. So their commissioner would say, hey, this field, we cannot have 6 games here today.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I had a chance to get out to Powell Saturday morning.
You mentioned that.
Really enjoyed myself over there. And the ironic thing about Powell, and I think everybody knows the parking situation is what it is. There are plans eventually there to expand it. Talk with Matt and all the folks over at Powell. They are planning on eventually working with the county to expand some parking over there because,
parking's always been an issue.
There's just not enough of it for the amount of support that you have for all these games.
And they in the
Right.
neighborhoods.
Right,
and people
exactly.
get up, yeah.
Exactly. But had a great time over there on Saturday morning before I went and broadcasted the Navy game this past Saturday. Shout out to one of the greatest jerseys I've ever seen, my man from SAC, Joel Destiny. On the back of his jersey, Bill, Golden Brown. That's his name. He's the left corner for Sac's defense from my man Jay Brooks.
I like
and
that.
They really played a super game, beat Pal 19-0 on Saturday morning. So shout out to those kids. And real quick, a couple of notes feature the 10 and unders this week. Chris Inzer is one of the great guys that does a great job of recapping the 10 and under bracket. Old Mill so far at 4-0 last week with a big win. Also, Severna Park beating the Bucks, and UQA getting set for a big one with Old Mill coming up this week. The former Southern Bulldog, Brian Aiken, who coaches UQA, they were champions last year, getting ready for a big tilt with Old Mill coming up this week in that 10 and under bracket. So if you have a chance, go to aacounty.org, get up under the team schedules, and go out and check out some great Youth League action this week. And again, our appreciation to Chris Sexton for providing us with a videotape with the Bucks and Gork in varsity U, with the Bucks winning it by a score of 12-6. When we come back, we'll turn our attention to the high schools. The Boston College commit Ethan Williams with a big day as the neighborhood rivals collided and Broadneck got by Severna Park. Those details and video coming up on the Gridiron Review. Welcome back. Time now to move to our high school segment. And when Broadneck and Severna Park get together, the ticket sales are all in advance. There's none the night of the game. And as I saw on social media, credit to my man Will Maynard this week, who is related to Ethan Williams. He said, Does anybody know what the meaning of sold out means? Here's what sold out means. It means if you don't have a ticket, you're not coming in.
Don't show up.
Don't show up. That's
Right.
really what it comes down to. But these two neighborhood rivals get together. And Broadneck, Bill, really asserting itself early here in the schedule. And look, when you've got a guy like Ethan Williams who can affect the game so much, big kick return, and then obviously goes out with 9 catches and 138 yards, they have right now the ultimate weapon and probably one of the leaders in the race for Player of the Year in the county already through 3 games.
Well, I was just going to say, I watched the highlights and I saw his 98-yard kickoff return, and he was, boom, gone. And the speed is, I mean, I can know how a Division I recruiter, he sees that tape and sees top-end speed. I mean, he looked like he was in a different bracket as far as the other kids on the field. Ethan Williams is legit and absolutely a favorite for the Rhodes Trophy that the Touchdown Club awards to Anne Arundel County's top football player, and also Capital Gazette newspapers. I mean, I don't know that we have too many other Division I players in the county. Obviously, Jaden Umbarger from Spalding is committed to Navy, but Ethan Williams going to Boston College, and he is A-grade legit. And what a nice security blanket for freshman quarterback Josh Ehrlich, who has really been solid. I mean, he has not had a bad game yet, but throw a short pass to Ethan Williams, will turn it into a 24-yard gain, and your stats look real nice.
17 of 31 for Ehrlich this week, the freshman, 200 yards in the game. But the thing that helps them, Bill, Carcamo with the running game.
Yeah, they're balanced.
You've got such a balanced offense that you've got to pick your poison. You put you roll your safety over to help against Williams. Maybe stick a backer out there a little further than you might, just to jam some of those short routes up. Well, then they just run it down your throat at that point. That's the beauty of what Broadneck has developed there with that offense right now. Really going to be interesting going forward to see how teams try to defend them because, again, as you said, whenever they want to, they can seemingly get the ball to Williams, and he can make a big play for them. Big game for Old Mill this week. They moved to 2-1, beating Meade by a score of 39-6. Marcus Thompson with 3 TD passes in that game. One to Cameron Winborn for 87 yards. So Old Mill getting on track here. And look,
Meade is struggling. I'm a little surprised. This is a team that's been fairly solid. Albert Jones did a good job. I mean, last year they were in the hunt for the playoffs, and they've started 0-3. And then, granted it's been a tough schedule. They played Arundel and now Old Mill, 2 of the top teams in the county. But Meade is now really playing behind the 8 ball. I'm surprised to see them 0-3.
The powers that be in the county did a smart thing. Teams like Northeast, Southern, the smaller classification schools don't necessarily have to cycle through against as many 4As as they have in the past. Northeast has been able to pick up an extra game against teams probably as competitive as them in terms of classification early in the season. And then this week into county play against North County, 61-40.
Yeah.
Almost like 7-on-7 action
shootout
between the Eagles and the Knights. Northeast, Bill, 3-0 on the season.
Right, head coach Brian Bublis is doing a terrific job, and I think you'll see from the stats they ran the ball like crazy. I think they had two runners over 100
Ethan
yards.
Young with 172 and Riley Pitt with 122.
Right,
So,
I mean that they are grounding and pounding, as you say. North County had a big game, I think.
Chris Leslie had 4 touchdowns.
3
for
rushing,
North County.
one receiving.
But you got to. I mean, some point somebody's got to play defense.
Right. Well,
101 points scored in a game.
Well, and this is good for North County. That is a shine of life because they had been struggling offensively up until now. But Northeast 3-0. Brian Bublis had said that they had not been 2-0 in quite some time, something like 15, 16 years. So I didn't have a chance to email them this week and find out when's the last time they were 3-0. But if they get to 4-0, we might be talking about historic type stuff for Northeast High School.
Might be since the days of Azizadin,
That's
Abdur,
right.
Raouf.
And Donnie Dorsey.
One of the great athletes in Anne Arundel County.
Anne Arundel County Sports Hall of Famer.
Still watched him in one of the greatest basketball games ever played in Anne Arundel County, a triple overtime playoff game between Southern and Northeast down at the barn in Harwood.
Yeah.
The Bulldogs, of course, came out victorious, but Ziz and Wayne Fenzel for Northeast were absolutely miraculous in that game. Annapolis beats Glen Burnie by a score of 36-12. Ahmad Middleton continues, Bill, to have a great season here for the Panthers. He has been very consistent for Annapolis in all 3 games so far, 134 yards and a TD on 24 carries. So no doubt where Nick Goodmalloy is getting the bread buttered right now with the Panthers as Middleton continues to be their top playmaker.
Well, Nick Goodmalloy said he was going to bring back a rushing offense. I mean, that's always been Annapolis' calling card, the wing T.
Wing T, baby.
You know, he's gotten away from that. He's not entirely wing T. They do a variety of things at Annapolis. But they are run-based. They want to run the ball. And I think you may see that Middleton had not really had, his first 2 games were tough games. Obviously, they opened up. They had Old Mill, which they played tough.
And Dundalk in week 1.
Right. And so I think he had like 123 yards in the first 2 games, but he goes crazy. 222 yards and 3 touchdowns, Pete?
Yeah, big game.
Right. So, and that I already mentioned that he is the son of a former Annapolis running back named Ahmad Middleton. And I remember him. He was an all-county running back, really
Hard
good.
to believe Ahmad Middleton's old enough to have kids.
I know. Well, and his kid's a good one. This is he actually has a son who's his namesake, Ahmad Jr. He already played in Annapolis. This is the second son, Ahmad, and he is legit. But a good win for the Panthers and Coach Goodmalloy. And on an interesting note, and I'll be writing an article in the Capitol this week, 40th anniversary of the 1978 Annapolis High State Championship. Some great players on that team: Kevin Thompson, Randy Pittman, Darrell Brown was the quarterback, went to Morgan State. They'll be celebrating their 40th anniversary of that state championship. Head coach Al Larimore, they'll be honored Friday night at the Annapolis football game.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Of course, the great Al Larimore for years, turning out terrific football product at Annapolis High. Battle of Unbeatens goes to Arundel. Ironically, both schools going to be affected eventually by the new Crofton High School that is under construction right now. Arundel wins at 42-20. Jordan Andrews rushing for 187 and 3 scores. Austin Sly with a couple of touchdown passes in that game for Arundel. But Bill, again, it's ground game for Arundel, such as we saw last year. We saw a lot more ground in the attack for Arundel. This year so far seems to be no exception early in the year.
Right. Well, I had not picked up on this, and I should have. Arundel is not totally run and shoot anymore.
Yeah.
I was texting back and forth with Rob Harris, the Broadneck coach, because this week is a big one.
Yes, sir.
Broadneck Arundel, and he was mentioning that he's got some work to do in terms of breaking down the film because Arundel is running a different offense under new head coach Jack Walsh, and I think it is a little more run-oriented, and Austin Sly is clearly a very good running quarterback as well. So I think they're trying to go for a little more balance, and it's just slightly different schemes than what they employed under Chuck Markowitz. But a big win for the Wildcats. Obviously, South River had been off to a strong start, and I think Coach Dolch had said this is going to be a big test for us. And South River just wasn't up to the standard. Joe Foy and they want to run the ball too, and they were not able to do so in this game. They got behind and weren't able to run the way they wanted to. Big win for Arundel, and we'll see what happens this week. Arundel Broadneck showdown.
Manchester Valley moves to 3-0, beating Southern 7-6. Chesapeake beat Catonsville 45-6. St. Mary's took on Delaware's smallest public school in Delmar. The Wildcats beat St. Mary's by a score of 35-24. 23. There's a good story developing at Severn. Henry Rentz is a lacrosse recruit going to the Naval Academy, committed there as of right now. He's turning into a pretty fine pass receiver for Craig Stevens over at Severn. They got a nice win over St. Albans, who's usually got a pretty polished club.
Right. You know, I was a little surprised by this result. I mean, I think people would have thought St. Albans would win this game. Craig Stevens, 3 touchdown passes to Henry Rentz. And if you remember last year, Craig Stevens got hurt, and Rentz had to take over as the quarterback. So
Henry Rentz, pretty good athlete.
A very good athlete. I mean, if you can switch from receiver to quarterback, and he did a pretty good job as quarterback last year. But that is a very good win for the Admirals.
Meanwhile, Archbishop Spalding over Bishop Moore by a score of 41-18.
Spalding finally
getting to play a game.
They get to play a game, and they were worried about this one because Hurricane and Bishop Moore's coming up from Florida, and they were worried that Bishop Moore might cancel because Spalding had the tie against Good Counsel and then had the next couple games canceled, so they wanted to just play some football.
Jason Venerable with 165 yards, 3 touchdowns in that game for Archbishop Spalding. And I love what Spalding's doing. Spalding obviously was going to try and play IMG, had a game with Good Counsel. I mean, you talk about playing a big-time schedule. Locally, you can't play much more of a big-time schedule than what Kyle Schmidt had lined up for his players here at the start of the season before he gets into the crux of his MIAA schedule.
Right. No, I like that Spalding's challenging themselves. And like you said, those kind of games against a good team like Bishop Moore are going to help you when you get into the MIAA Conference Wars. And as we already know, that championship has already been awarded to St. Francis. So they're not really playing for a championship. But obviously, I think within the league, it's bragging rights to see who, other than St. Francis, is the best team in that very tough conference.
I know a guy who runs a good trophy shop right down the street.
Yeah, they get a little trophy.
Look, we'll give you a Gridiron Review trophy.
Right.
To
Central Florida declared
whoever has the best record of the rest of the MIAA schools, we'll bring you a trophy. Okay?
That's right.
We can celebrate. We'll take a picture with you, and everything will be A-okay. When we come back, we'll talk colleges and pros right next here on the Gridiron Review. Welcome back to the Gridiron Review. Shane, we're going to be in Dallas on Friday night because we'd love to go see that Broadneck Arundel game. It's going to be an outstanding game. Get on out and see that game.
We'll hope to have highlights for that game. That'll hopefully be our highlight package for this coming week.
No doubt about it. A pair of undefeateds at 3-0 going into that contest. We will be in Dallas for Navy and SMU this past week. Navy with a workmanlike win over Lehigh. But what I like coming out of the game, Bill, is Ken Niumatalolo not happy about necessarily a lot of the things his team did during the game, and that some of the things his coaching staff did. He said they got to coach better, they got to play better as they get back into conference play next week in Dallas.
Yeah, it was a bit of an odd press conference. I mean, Navy won that game 51-21, and really it was 51-7 until they put in all the reserves and Lehigh scored 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. So you did not expect to hear Coach Niumatalolo kind of, critical of his team's performance, but I think he's assessing what he saw and, putting it against, well, what if this was SMU or what if this was another American Athletic Conference opponent? Could we have afforded these mistakes that we made? And the answer is no. So, you like to see that. But it was just odd to hear him. I mean, he was really down. I mean, this was not an act. He was really kind of disconsolate about some of the things that had happened. He mentioned his coaching staff. I mean, they had a punt, and they had to take a delay of game penalty because they didn't have the right personnel on the field. Right. That's inexcusable, and that's on the coaches. Got to make sure the right players are out there so you can punt the ball. But Malcolm Perry, my God, every single week it's something else. And that run in which he was dead to rights, about to be sacked in the backfield by a Lehigh defensive tackle who ended up literally grasping at air because Malcolm gives to this and he's there out the back door. What another spectacular run. I mean, that kid can change directions like no one I've ever seen. It really is remarkable. And I'm looking forward to when he gets a full grasp of running this triple option, because when Navy has it all clicking on all cylinders and the fullbacks and the slots are involved, it's going to make Malcolm Perry even more dangerous. Right now, he's doing a lot of it on his own, I think.
A lot of the slot backs did get involved this week, which was a good sign.
C.J. Williams.
C.J. Williams had a great game. First time this year the A's really had a chance to make plays for the Mids in that one. That run you're talking about, 62-yarder. Perry now, 3 200-yard games. The Navy record is 5, held by Chris McCoy. Perry's got all of this year and next year.
Yeah, I think he may get that record.
Potentially do
5
that.
more turnovers defense. That's 9 forced turnovers in 2 games. So that's a very encouraging sign for Dale Pearson.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Meanwhile, Maryland flat as a pancake against Temple.
Unbelievable.
Temple, who had underachieved big time.
Right.
Temple's a lot better than they played in their first 2
Lost
games.
to Villanova, an FCS school.
Yeah.
Lost to Buffalo, a MAC school.
Shouldn't have lost either game.
No,
The
yeah.
talent's too good for that there.
I agree.
Made a quarterback switch, changed their fortunes. They won 35-14 against the Terps this past week. And what had been so good for Maryland, Bill, through the first 2 weeks, non-existent. The running game just never got percolating for the Terrapins this past week. And don't sell Minnesota short. Minnesota's off to a great start for P.J. Fleck. They're going to be a problem for Maryland coming up next week.
All right, now this is a very disappointing performance for Maryland, and it's almost a head scratcher. You know, they had played so well through 2 games, beat Texas in a big win at FedEx Field, and then went out to Bowling Green and laid it on Bowling Green. And, Kasim Hill, this was a game, they had 2 starting offensive linemen injured. One of their tailbacks, Lorenzo Harrison, was out. So they were a little depleted, but, Kasim Hill is a guy that is a blue chip recruit, and this is kind of maybe a game where he has to make some plays. One play that really stood out, it was like 3rd and 2, and he was surveying the field, didn't have anything. He could have run. He could have run for 10 yards before he even got touched. Converted the first down, tried to throw deep downfield. The play was just not there. Receiver was covered well. You want to see Kasim Hill step up and be more of a playmaker, especially in a day like that when the offense is struggling.
Yeah, the quarterback's got to be a little bit of a leader. And I think, again, you look at the lack of reps, game reps that he has had. Those are part of the growing pains that
injured
you
all
have,
last year.
With a quarterback in that situation. As I said, big one coming up with Minnesota this week for the Terrapins. On the pros side, last week it was all glee. The Ravens and Redskins both won. There was a lot to smile about. There was a lot to talk about. This week, however, Mike Flacco was the better Flacco this week. Though Joe didn't play bad Thursday night, but the defense for once, a little bit flat for the Ravens in a 34-23 loss to Cincinnati. Big Red, Andy Dalton, and A.J. Green found each other 3 times for touchdowns. Clearly, one thing you also noticed, the Ravens missed C.J. Mosley on that defense.
Well, I was just about to say, he had first series of the game, he goes out and he's the defensive leader. He calls the defensive signals, so he's key in the communication. Ravens didn't really get sorted until Eric Weddle, the safety, finally took over later in the second half and decided he would start making the defensive calls because C.J. Mosley's replacement wasn't getting the job done. A.J. Green is pretty darn good, and he can make your secondary look silly. And problem is they didn't get any pressure on Andy Dalton. Nobody laid a glove on him. No pressure, and he has all day. He's going to find that A.J. Green, a big target who gets open. Poor performance for the Ravens. Really kind of a surprise that it just laid an egg, and they fell behind 21-0, then 28-7. Really dug themselves a hole. It was actually rather remarkable that Flacco was able to lead a comeback in which the Ravens were within striking distance, but since he closed it out.
Redskins, meanwhile, fall in rather thud-like fashion to Indianapolis. Both teams scored 3 times. Colts scored touchdowns. Redskins scored field goals. 7 beats 3 by my public school math. And, really, again, flat performance by the Redskins. Defense was okay, not great. Running game, which was good week 1, not there. Alex Smith and Paul Richardson and company couldn't make a big play in the passing game. When you throw to Chris Thompson, who has 13 catches and he has less than 100 yards, that means you're dumping at that running back an awful lot. And where Thompson can be Superman and make big plays, not the case this week. Colts kept him bottled up.
No, I think a lot of this is on the Redskins' offensive line. I mean, they didn't give Alex Smith enough time to throw. He's under duress quite a bit. Got sacked a couple times. I mean, I don't think anybody's ever tried to say the Indianapolis Colts have one of the top defensive lines in NFL, in the National Football League. So that was a little bit surprising. And I was listening to Clinton Portis calling out Trent Williams, the guy who normally the All-Pro, and said he got run by a couple times. Yeah. It was not a great day for the Redskins offensive line. Did not create any running room. I think AP, Adrian Peterson, who had the big game in week 1 with 20 yards or something like that. Not much, nothing going on the ground. It became very one-dimensional, as Jay Gruden said. Very, very poor performance by the Skins. And you're right. I mean, we were all happy after week 1. The Ravens are good. The Redskins are good. It's going to be a great year. It's going to be fun in this area. And then in week 2, it's like, come on.
Now everybody wishes they had Ryan Fitzpatrick playing for their fantasy football team, as he had another big week this week.
And what a show afterwards with that outfit and the press conference.
I couldn't pull that off. I couldn't pull that off at all. He helped the Buccaneers beat the Eagles, so the Eagles, Cowboys, and Redskins are all 1-1 right now in the NFC East. And by the way, take this note with you. I know a lot of you parents out there, you want your kids to go to the best colleges. Everybody wants to go to Alabama and Auburn and LSU, who had a big win this week, Ohio State, where Dwayne Haskins from Maryland is playing extremely well. This week in the National Football League, three of the best players, three of the most impactful players across the league this week played at South Carolina State in the MEAC, Lindenwood, which is an NAIA.
I've never even heard of that school.
It's in Kansas.
Okay.
And Kentucky Wesleyan.
Yeah.
Those guys played at those three spots, making big game checks in the NFL this week. It's not as important as to where you play, that you just get somewhere and play. And a credit to the scouting departments of the Colts, Browns, and Jaguars, respectively, to get out there and see kids like that who eventually make plays on their football team.
Right. Well, they will find you. If you're legit, Matt Judon for the Ravens was from Grand Valley State.
Right.
I mean,
Division II power out of Michigan.
Right. I mean, if you're good, they will find you. Trust me.
No doubt about it. Doesn't matter whether you play 1, 2, or 3 NAIA, they will find you in the world of football. That'll do it for this week's program. Again, our thanks to Chris Sexton for providing the highlights of that Bucks-Gort game for us in the Varsity U, and also our Broadneck and Severna Park highlights. Broadneck going to be featured again this week with Arundel. It's a battle of 3-0s. You want to get out and see that game on Friday night. For Bill Wagner, I'm Pete Medhurst. Thanks for joining us this week on the Gridiron Review.